The pristine halls of the Centauri Science Academy gleamed under crystalline lights, their surfaces reflecting the shimmering forms of dozens of alien species gathered for the annual Galactic Science Board Conference. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the podium, her dark eyes scanning the amphitheater as she adjusted the holographic display controls with steady hands. "Distinguished members of the board," she began, her voice clear and confident, despite the weight of countless alien gazes, "I present to you Project Archimedes." With a gesture, she brought up the schematics of humanity's latest starship design. The hologram filled the chamber with intricate layers of blue light, displaying mathematics that made several crystalline beings in the audience flicker with visible distress. The ship's design rotated slowly in the air, its unconventional geometry drawing murmurs from the assembled scientists. Unlike the sleek, predictable shapes of standard vessels, this one seemed to fold in on itself in ways that challenged conventional understanding of spatial mechanics. High Theorist Zix 427, a being composed of interwoven streams of plasma contained within a transparent shell, moved forward. "Dr. Chen, our preliminary analysis suggests this design violates no fewer than 3 fundamental laws of spacetime architecture. The quantum stress calculations alone are perfectly sound," Sarah interrupted, bringing up a new set of equations. "If you'll observe the parametric oscillations in the 4th dimensional plane." She highlighted a specific section of the mathematics, causing several audience members to emit sounds of disbelief. A Medusan observer, their crystalline form refracting light in patterns that indicated intense cognitive activity, raised an appendage. "Our most advanced quantum computers indicate this configuration would collapse into a singularity within 3.7 microseconds of activation." Sarah smiled, an expression that her years of diplomatic training had taught her most alien species now recognized. "That's because your quantum computers are operating on a fundamental misunderstanding of spacetime plasticity." She brought up another diagram, this one showing the interaction between the ship's drive system and the surrounding spacetime fabric. "Look here," she continued, highlighting a particular sequence. "The traditional model assumes a rigid framework of universal constants, but our research suggests these constants are more flexible than previously believed. They're more like strong guidelines than absolute laws." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of protests. A group of energy beings near the front began vibrating at frequencies that made the air shimmer. The crystalline beings in the upper tiers had shifted to colors that Sarah's xenobiology training identified as indicating extreme agitation. High Theorist Zix 427's plasma form swirled in complex patterns. "Dr. Chen, with all due respect to Earth's scientific achievements, this proposal borders on dangerous fantasy. The universe does not bend its rules for biological intuition." "No," Sarah agreed, bringing up one final diagram. "But perhaps our understanding of the rules has been incomplete." The hologram now showed a series of nested geometries that seemed to fold through dimensions in ways that made several audience members look away. "We're not trying to break the universe's laws. We're simply seeing them from a new perspective." The Medusan observer's crystalline structure had taken on a deep violet hue. "The Galactic Science Board cannot endorse the construction of a vessel based on creative mathematics. The potential risks to local spacetime stability are incalculable." Sarah began collecting her data crystals, her movements deliberate and unhurried. "With respect, honored members, I didn't come seeking endorsement." She looked up, meeting the gaze of each being in turn. "I came as a courtesy, to share what humanity has discovered. The Archimedes Protocol isn't a theory anymore. Construction begins next month." The chamber descended into chaos, but Sarah was already walking toward the exit, her head held high. In her pocket, her quantum communicator vibrated with an incoming message from James Okonjo. "First test successful. The alloy holds." She allowed herself a small smile as the doors closed behind her, leaving the sounds of scientific outrage behind. They didn't need to understand yet. They just needed to watch. James Okonjo floated in the observation bubble of Mining Station Delta, watching chunks of processed ore drift past in neat, regulated lines. To any casual observer, it looked like standard asteroid mining operations. Just another human facility extracting resources from the belt. The truth hung suspended in the vacuum beyond the station's shielding, invisible to most eyes, but blindingly obvious to his. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he murmured, pressing a hand against the transparent aluminum of the bubble. The quantum-locked alloy they'd created caught starlight in ways that shouldn't be possible, its surface rippling with subtle patterns that made his eyes water if he looked too long. His tablet chimed with an incoming message. "Inspection vessel approaching." The text scrolled across his retinal display. "ETA 12 minutes. James tapped his neural link, connecting to the station's internal communication system. "All right, everyone. Places, please. Let's give our guests the show they're expecting." The massive hangar, carved from the heart of a captured asteroid, shifted into its public configuration. Specialized equipment retracted into hidden compartments, replaced by standard mining gear. The Quantum Forge, their crown jewel, transformed into what appeared to be a conventional smelting facility. Through the observation bubble, James watched the alien vessel approach. It was a Medusan design, all crystalline angles and pulsing light patterns. The same species that had been at Dr. Chen's presentation last week. They were getting nervous, increasing their surveillance of human operations. "Docking sequence initiated," the station AI announced. James straightened his mining engineer's uniform and headed for the airlock. The Medusan inspector emerged from their ship in a containment field that mimicked their homeworld's atmosphere. Their crystalline form shifted through patterns of blue and green. Professional curiosity, James' xenobiology training supplied. "Inspector Carthex," James greeted them with a slight bow. "Welcome to Mining Station Delta." "Engineer Okonjo." The Medusan's translation field converted their light patterns into crisp, accented English. "Your production numbers have been interesting lately, particularly in the realm of exotic alloys." James gestured toward the main hangar. "We've made some refinements to our processing techniques. Nothing groundbreaking. Just good old-fashioned human efficiency improvements." They toured the facility, James pointing out exactly what the inspector expected to see. Standard ore processors, conventional electromagnetic separators, all the usual equipment of a mining operation. The quantum forge hummed beneath it all, its true nature hidden in dimensional frequencies the Medusan's sensors couldn't detect. "Your yield ratios are unusually high," Carthex noted, their crystalline form shifting to a more intense blue, particularly for materials that traditionally resist bonding. James pulled up a series of production charts on his tablet. "We've found that adjusting the processing temperature by just 0.03% makes a significant difference. Would you like to see the thermal regulation logs?" The inspector's form flickered, the equivalent of a resigned sigh. After 2 hours of investigating exactly what they expected to find, they prepared to depart. "One more thing." Carthex paused at their airlock. "There are rumors that certain human facilities are preparing materials for an impossible project." James raised his eyebrows in practiced surprise. "You mean Dr. Chen's theoretical design? That's well outside our scope here. We're just simple miners." The Medusan's form shifted to a subtle violet, skepticism tinged with frustration. But they had no evidence, no reason to extend their inspection. "Indeed. Good day, Engineer Okonjo." Once the inspection vessel cleared the station's security perimeter, James returned to the observation bubble. He activated his private channel to the Quantum Forge's control room. "Resume full production," he ordered, "and get me Dr. Chen. Tell her the latest batch is ready for testing." Through the window, the processed alloy caught the starlight again, its surface dancing with possibilities that no alien sensor could comprehend. James smiled. They weren't just building the impossible. They were rewriting the definition of possible itself. The prototype chamber hummed with potential energy as Dr. Sarah Chen monitored the initial powered-up sequence. Behind reinforced observation windows, James Okonjo's quantum-forged alloys gleamed with an inner light that seemed to shift between dimensions. Everything was proceeding exactly as calculated, until it wasn't. Power fluctuation in Sector 7, called out Lieutenant Maria Santos from her station. Her fingers danced across holographic controls, trying to stabilize the reading. The quantum field it's not failing, it's expanding, Sarah finished, watching in horror as reality itself seemed to ripple around 3 technicians working near the prototype's core. Time stretched like taffy, the air shimmering with possibilities. "Get them out of there," James shouted, already moving toward the chamber's entrance. But before anyone could reach them, the technicians simply vanished. Where they had stood, a sphere of distorted space-time pulsed with otherworldly energy. The observation deck erupted into controlled chaos. Alarms blared as sensors registered impossible readings. Through the windows, Sarah could see the sphere slowly expanding, its surface reflecting fragments of reality like a shattered mirror. "All readings off the charts," Maria reported, her voice steady despite the crisis. "We're detecting temporal displacement, spatial folding, and something else. Something the sensors can't categorize." James reached the main console, his dark eyes scanning the data streams. "The quantum field hasn't collapsed. It's stable. That shouldn't be possible with this level of distortion." Sarah's mind raced through calculations, through possibilities. The missing technicians weren't dead. Their life signs still registered on the monitors, but the signals were strange, echoing as if coming from multiple locations simultaneously. "They're not gone," she said suddenly, straightening up. "They're everywhere." The observation deck fell silent as all eyes turned to her. She pulled up a complex series of equations, the mathematics of their ship's theoretical drive system. "Look at these patterns. The technicians aren't lost in space-time. They're experiencing all potential spaces simultaneously. Like quantum particles before observation collapses their wave function." James breathed, understanding dawning in his eyes. Sarah nodded. "Exactly. And if I'm right," she began typing rapidly, reconfiguring the sensor arrays. "There. Do you see it?" The new readings showed something extraordinary. Within the distortion field, human neural patterns remained coherent, despite existing across multiple dimensional states, where alien minds would have fragmented, unable to process the simultaneous experience of multiple realities. Human consciousness adapted. "We can go in after them," Sarah announced, already removing her lab coat. "Our minds can handle it. We evolved to see patterns, to make sense of chaos. That's why the ship design works. It's not about breaking physical laws. It's about perceiving them differently." James grabbed her arm. "Sarah, we don't know what that field will do to a living person." She met his gaze steadily. "Those are our people in there. And now we know why all the alien quantum computers said this was impossible. Their binary logic can't comprehend existing in multiple states simultaneously. But we can." Before anyone could stop her, Sarah stripped off her monitoring devices and approached the chamber's entrance. James cursed under his breath, then moved to join her. "If we're not back in 10 minutes, Sarah instructed Maria, initiate a complete power shutdown. That should collapse the field back to normal spacetime." Together, they stepped into the chamber. The distortion field rippled around them like water, reality fragmenting into infinite possibilities. Sarah felt her consciousness expand, experiencing multiple versions of herself across countless dimensional planes. But instead of breaking her mind, it felt natural, like remembering a dream or imagining different possibilities. Through the quantum haze, she saw the missing technicians, their forms shifting between states of being. They weren't panicking. They were exploring, their human minds instinctively navigating the impossible space. "Pattern recognition," James whispered beside her, his voice echoing across dimensions. the most basic human trait. Sarah smiled as understanding flooded through her. They hadn't built an impossible ship. They'd built one that only humans could comprehend. Maya Patel had always seen the world differently. Where others saw random data points, she saw constellations of meaning. Her colleagues called it intuition. She called it paying attention. 3 days after the quantum field incident, she sat in her small office aboard Mining Station Delta, surrounded by holographic displays of test data. The rescued technicians had recovered fully, their minds seemingly unchanged by the experience of existing across multiple dimensional states. But something about their sensor readings kept drawing her attention. Display test sequence Gamma 7 again, she instructed the station's eye. The hologram shifted, showing the complex wave patterns generated during the incident. Maya leaned forward, her dark eyes reflecting the dancing light of the display. Something about those waves looked familiar. Cross-reference with Earth's natural phenomena database, she said suddenly, her fingers moving through the air to manipulate the data. Focus on fluid dynamics and growth patterns. The computer compiled the results, and Maya's breath caught in her throat. The quantum field fluctuations matched, almost perfectly, the flow patterns of water moving through river deltas. She expanded the search. Tree growth patterns, crystal formation, weather systems, even the neural pathways of the human brain itself. All of them shared the same fundamental geometry as the impossible ship design. Her hand shaking slightly, Maya opened a comm channel. Dr. Chen, I need you to see this. 20 minutes later, Sarah Chen and James Okonjo stood in Maya's office, watching as she explained her discovery. It's not just similar, Maya said, overlaying the patterns. It's identical. The ship's quantum field geometry follows the same patterns that appear naturally all over Earth. That's why the alien quantum computers can't model it, James breathed, understanding dawning in his eyes. They're programmed to follow rigid mathematical laws, but nature doesn't work that way. It follows patterns of least resistance, of maximum efficiency. Sarah moved closer to the displays, her expression intense, and human brains evolved alongside these patterns for millions of years. We developed neural pathways that mirror them. She turned to Maya. That's why we can comprehend multiple dimensional states when alien minds can't. Our brains are already structured to process this kind of information. Maya nodded, pulling up another set of data. Look at the brainwave patterns of the technicians during the incident. The display showed complex, interwoven frequencies that pulsed with familiar rhythms. Their minds automatically synchronized with the quantum field because it follows patterns they've been processing their entire lives. Every time we watch water flow around rocks, James said softly, every time we see branches growing toward sunlight, we're practicing quantum mechanics without knowing it. Sarah finished. She straightened up, her eyes bright with excitement. Maya, this changes everything. We're not defying the laws of physics with the Archimedes protocol. We're working with them in ways that evolved naturally on Earth. Maya touched a control, and the office filled with overlapping patterns, river deltas branching across continents, neural networks firing in human brains, quantum fields wrapping around the prototype ship's core, all following the same fundamental dance of reality. There's more, she said, her voice quiet but intense. I think this is why humans developed imagination and intuition the way we did. We don't just recognize these patterns, we can extrapolate from them, visualize new variations. When we imagine possibilities, we're subconsciously processing quantum mechanical principles, Sarah whispered. Every daydream, every creative thought, is practice for understanding higher dimensional physics, James concluded. He laughed suddenly. No wonder the aliens think we're crazy. We've been training to build impossible things since before we invented fire. Maya smiled, watching the patterns dance around them. In the end, the greatest scientific breakthrough of human history hadn't come from breaking the rules. It had come from finally understanding why humans had evolved to see the world the way they did. The ship that shouldn't exist was inevitable after all. They just had to learn to see it. Commander Helen Marcus stood on the bridge of the paradox, her hands hovering over the neural interface controls. Through the sweeping viewports, she could see the gathered fleet of alien observation vessels hanging against the star-studded backdrop of space. They had come to witness either a breakthrough or a catastrophe. All systems ready, Maya Patel reported from her station, where holographic displays showed the quantum field harmonics they'd discovered in nature. The patterns are holding stable. Helen took a deep breath, feeling the ship's systems through the neural link. The quantum-forged alloys sang with potential, resonating with frequencies that felt as natural as a heartbeat. Dr. Chen's voice came through the comm system from the observation station. "Remember, Commander, don't fight the physics. Dance with it." "Initiating primary sequence," Helen announced. Her fingers touched the controls, and reality shifted. The quantum field bloomed around the ship like a flower unfolding in sunlight. Through the neural link, Helen could feel the multiple states of existence the field generated. But instead of being disorienting, it felt like remembering a dream or visualizing a route through a familiar city. Alien vessels are reporting sensor malfunctions, James Okonjo reported from engineering. Their quantum computers can't process what they're seeing. Helen smiled. Showtime. With a thought through the neural link, she engaged the Archimedes protocol. The paradox moved, but not in any way conventional physics could describe. The ship didn't so much travel through space as flow through possibilities, following the same patterns that rivers carved through mountains and lightning branched through storm clouds. Through the viewports, space itself seemed to ripple and fold. The alien vessels grew agitated, their sensors recording movement that their computers insisted was impossible. But the paradox wasn't breaking physics, it was working with natural principles older than civilization itself. "Beginning maneuver sequence alpha," Helen announced. The ship responded to her thoughts like an extension of her own body. They spun through dimensional states that no alien mind could comprehend, but which felt as natural to the human crew as walking. Maya's voice was filled with wonder as she monitored the readings. "The quantum field is perfectly synchronized with our neural patterns. It's like the ship is dreaming with us." In engineering, James watched the power readings with satisfaction. The quantum-forged alloys are performing better than expected. They're not just containing the field, they're amplifying it. Helen guided the paradox through a series of maneuvers that would have seemed impossible just months ago. The ship danced between stars, its movement following patterns that echoed everything from DNA helixes to galactic spirals. The alien vessels tried to track them with conventional sensors, but the paradox existed in too many states simultaneously for their binary logic to process. "Final sequence," Helen announced. She closed her eyes, visualizing the complex path they would take. The neural link translated her intuitive understanding of space into quantum mechanical reality. The paradox moved in ways that defied traditional physics, while perfectly following the fundamental patterns of nature. When they came to a stop, they had covered a distance that should have taken weeks in just under an hour. The alien vessels hung motionless, their sensors overwhelmed by data they couldn't categorize. Dr. Chen's voice came through the comm, barely containing her excitement. "Perfect execution, Commander. The Galactic Science Board is, well, let's say they're reconsidering their position on impossible things." Helen looked out at the stars, seeing them now not as distant points of light, but as notes in a cosmic dance that humanity had finally learned to join. "We never needed to prove them wrong," she said softly. "We just needed to show them a new way to be right." Through the neural link, she could feel the paradox humming with possibilities. They hadn't built a ship that broke the laws of physics. They'd built one that followed the deepest laws of all. The patterns that nature had been teaching humanity since the first human looked up at the stars and dreamed of dancing among them. Commander Helen Marcus stood on the bridge of the paradox, her hands hovering over the neural interface controls. Through the sweeping viewports, she could see the gathered fleet of alien observation vessels hanging against the star-studded backdrop of space. They had come to witness either a breakthrough or a catastrophe. All systems ready, Maya Patel reported from her station, where holographic displays showed the quantum field harmonics they'd discovered in nature. The patterns are holding stable. Helen took a deep breath, feeling the ship's systems through the neural link. The quantum-forged alloys sang with potential, resonating with frequencies that felt as natural as a heartbeat. Dr. Chen's voice came through the comm system from the observation station. "Remember, Commander, don't fight the physics. Dance with it." Initiating primary sequence, Helen announced. Her fingers touched the controls, and reality shifted. The quantum field bloomed around the ship like a flower unfolding in sunlight. Through the neural link, Helen could feel the multiple states of existence the field generated. But instead of being disorienting, it felt like remembering a dream, or visualizing a route through a familiar city. Alien vessels are reporting sensor malfunctions. James Okonjo reported from engineering. Their quantum computers can't process what they're seeing. Helen smiled. Showtime. With a thought through the neural link, she engaged the Archimedes protocol. The paradox moved, but not in any way conventional physics could describe. The ship didn't so much travel through space as flow through possibilities, following the same patterns that rivers carved through mountains and lightning branched through storm clouds. Through the viewports, space itself seemed to ripple and fold. The alien vessels grew agitated, their sensors recording movement that their computers insisted was impossible. But the paradox wasn't breaking physics, it was working with natural principles older than civilization itself. Beginning maneuver sequence alpha, Helen announced. The ship responded to her thoughts like an extension of her own body. They spun through dimensional states that no alien mind could comprehend, but which felt as natural to the human crew as walking. Maya's voice was filled with wonder as she monitored the readings. The quantum field is perfectly synchronized with our neural patterns. It's like the ship is dreaming with us. In engineering, James watched the power readings with satisfaction. The quantum-forged alloys are performing better than expected. They're not just containing the field, they're amplifying it. Helen guided the paradox through a series of maneuvers that would have seemed impossible just months ago. The ship danced between stars, its movement following patterns that echoed everything from DNA helixes to galactic spirals. The alien vessels tried to track them with conventional sensors, but the paradox existed in too many states simultaneously for their binary logic to process. Final sequence, Helen announced. She closed her eyes, visualizing the complex path they would take. The neural link translated her intuitive understanding of space into quantum mechanical reality. The paradox moved in ways that defied traditional physics while perfectly following the fundamental patterns of nature. When they came to a stop, they had covered a distance that should have taken weeks in just under an hour. The alien vessels hung motionless, their sensors overwhelmed by data they couldn't categorize. Dr. Chen's voice came through the comm, barely containing her excitement. "Perfect execution, Commander. The Galactic Science Board is, well, let's say they're reconsidering their position on impossible things." Helen looked out at the stars, seeing them now not as distant points of light, but as notes in a cosmic dance that humanity had finally learned to join. "We never needed to prove them wrong," she said softly. "We just needed to show them a new way to be right." Through the neural link, she could feel the paradox humming with possibilities. They hadn't built a ship that broke the laws of physics. They'd built one that followed the deepest laws of all. The patterns that nature had been teaching humanity since the first human looked up at the stars and dreamed of dancing among them. #A new understanding. The paradox hung in space beside Research Station Omega, its quantum field extended in a protective embrace around the failing facility. Through the neural interface, Commander Helen Marcus could feel the storm's energy battering against their defenses, but the field held firm, adapting to each new surge like a tree bending in the wind. "Station shield failure in 3 minutes," Maya reported, her fingers flying across multiple holographic displays. Even with our field support, their conventional systems can't handle this level of dimensional stress. Helen studied the storm through both visual sensors and quantum readings. The massive disturbance wasn't just affecting space, it was rewriting the local laws of physics themselves. Then she noticed something in the pattern of the energy flows. "Maya," she called out, "overlay the storm's current pattern with the paradox's quantum field geometry." The displays merged, and Helen's intuition crystallized into understanding. "James, are you seeing this? The storm isn't just disrupting space-time. It's trying to establish a new geometric pattern." In engineering, James Okonjo examined the combined data and drew in a sharp breath. "It's like a river changing course. Space itself is trying to find a new path of least resistance." "Can we help it along?" Helen asked, already forming a plan. "If we modify our field geometry to complement the storm's natural patterns instead of fighting them." "Theoretically possible," James replied, "but it would mean temporarily dropping our protective field around the station." Dr. Chen's voice cut in from the emergency channel. "The Galactic Science Board is demanding we retreat. Their models show the storm's power increasing exponentially." Helen smiled. "Their models also said the paradox couldn't exist. Maya, calculate timing for a synchronized field shift. James, prepare to channel all power to the quantum drive. We're not running from this storm. We're going to dance with it." The next 3 minutes were a blur of precise calculations and adjustments. As the station's shields approached critical failure, Helen guided the paradox through a series of intricate maneuvers, its quantum field pulsing in rhythms that matched the storm's own frequencies. "Field shift in 3, 2, 1. Maya counted down. Helen released their protective bubble around the station and instead directed the paradox's quantum field to merge with the storm's energy patterns. Through the neural link, she could feel the ship becoming part of the dimensional disturbance, not fighting it but joining its dance. "Station shields failing," Maya called out. But Helen was focused on the larger pattern now visible in their sensors. The storm's energy wasn't random. It was following the same geometric principles they'd discovered in Earth's natural phenomena. And like a river whose course they'd subtly redirected, the quantum surge began to flow around the station instead of through it. "Remarkable," James breathed, watching the readings. "We're not stopping the storm. We're teaching it a new pattern." The massive energy disturbance continued its journey through space, but now it curved gracefully around Research Station Omega, following the path the paradox had shown it. The station's remaining shield stabilized, no longer under direct assault. Hours later, in the Galactic Science Board's emergency session, Dr. Chen presented their findings. The holographic displays showed how the paradox had essentially taught space itself a new way to behave, using principles derived from Earth's natural patterns. "What you're proposing is unprecedented," High theorist Zix 427 stated, their plasma forms swirling with agitation. "The idea that quantum-level space-time phenomena can be guided like a river. Nature has been showing us how energy finds its optimal path since the first rivers carved their way through Earth's continents," Sarah responded. "We didn't invent these patterns, we just learned to speak their language." The evidence was undeniable. The paradox hadn't just saved the research station, it had demonstrated that the very fabric of space-time could be worked with rather than against. The quantum surge storm had become their proof that the universe operated on principles far more complex and beautiful than anyone had imagined. And humanity, with its natural gift for seeing and adapting patterns, was uniquely suited to explore these new possibilities. 1 year after the quantum storm incident, the paradox floated in high orbit above Earth, its quantum-forged hull catching sunlight in ways that still made observers pause in wonder. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the ship's observation dome, watching a newly commissioned vessel emerge from the orbital shipyards below. "The Fibonacci," she said softly, admiring the way the new ship's geometry followed the same natural patterns they'd discovered in everything from river deltas to neural networks. First of her class, Maya Patel joined her at the viewport, her tablet displaying streams of data from the ongoing construction. The quantum field harmonics are even more stable than ours. Amazing what we can achieve when we stop fighting physics and start listening to it. The observation dome's door whispered open as James Okonjo entered, followed by a tall, crystalline being. One of the many alien scientists who now called the newly established Dimensional Studies Institute home. The latest test results are fascinating, the crystalline scientist said, their translated voice humming with excitement. We've identified similar pattern recognition capabilities in several species, just expressed differently. It seems the universe has been teaching all of us, each in our own way. Sarah smiled, remembering the hostile audience at the Galactic Science Board just a year ago. Now that same board had approved funding for joint research projects exploring how different species' perspectives could combine to reveal new layers of reality. Commander Marcus sends her regards, James added. The joint training program is going better than expected. Turns out humans aren't the only ones who can learn to dance with quantum fields. We just happened to notice the music first. Through the viewport, they could see shuttles carrying students and researchers from a dozen different species to and from the Institute. What had started as a controversial human experiment had evolved into something far more significant, a new way of understanding the universe itself. I've been analyzing the patterns we've discovered, Maya said, pulling up a complex holographic display. They're not just in nature and quantum mechanics. They appear in art, music, mathematics, even in how different species develop language. It's like the universe has been trying to teach us all the same lesson. Sarah finished. We just needed to learn how to understand each other to see it. The Fibonacci's quantum drive activated, its field visible as a subtle distortion of space-time. Unlike the crude, brute force approach of conventional drives, the new ship's systems worked in harmony with the universe's own rhythms. It was beautiful, efficient, and most importantly, natural. The next expedition launches tomorrow, James reminded them. First joint human-alien crew to explore the quantum corridors we've been mapping. Who would have thought our impossible ship would lead to this? Sarah watched as more construction platforms came online in orbit, each preparing to build vessels that merged the best insights of multiple species. The paradox had shown them that the impossible was just a matter of perspective. Now they were learning that every perspective added something valuable to their understanding. We're not just building bridges between stars, she said, touching the cool transparency of the viewport. We're building bridges between ways of seeing the universe. Every species brings its own patterns, its own insights. Maya's tablet chimed with an incoming message. Speaking of insights, the quantum field mapping team has detected something interesting in the Carina Nebula. Patterns similar to the storm, but structured, like they were deliberately created. Sarah felt a familiar thrill of discovery. Perhaps they weren't the first species to learn these lessons. Perhaps somewhere out there, others had already learned to dance with the quantum rhythms of spacetime, leaving behind patterns for others to find. The paradox hummed softly around them, its impossible geometry a testament to what could happen when determination met insight, when different perspectives combined to reveal new truths. They had built a ship that shouldn't exist, and in doing so, they had discovered that nothing was truly impossible. It was just waiting for the right pattern to emerge.